Good morning. It is 10 in the morning, Wednesday. So, what the hell am I doing today? Well, I need to work on these dynamic water ripples, which we have proven out that we can use textures, we can draw to them fast enough, and we can have them at high enough precision to actually have some information inside of our pixel shader, which you could probably use to actually do stuff. I need more paper. So what I need to do next, I need to figure out how the hell I'm actually going to do dynamic ripples in code and how I can actually write them to this texture in a way that, well, actually works. So right now I've got it, so we can spawn dynamic ripples on our texture, and this is just a debug view of a 1 pixel wide box which gets updated, and you can see our frames per second hold just fine when we're doing this. And that's with the 512 texture writing every frame, so that is, no problem whatsoever. Good morning, Karakan. First thing I gotta do is I gotta think about stuff, so this might take a little while. Gosh, it's gonna be interesting. Well, thank you for auto-hosting Solix Interactive. I have absolutely no idea who you are. Maybe I should Google that. Oh, another Twitch streamer. Very cool. Alright. So I need to figure out how I'm actually going to update these ripples that I've got on this water surface. God. Alright, how am I going to do this? So, this is another part of development. You gotta sit down and actually think about what the hell you're doing, because I certainly do not know how to actually solve this problem. So how do we approach it? Write down what we want to happen? Alright, so things we want to happen, and then we'll figure out how we can get there. Good morning, Mima Faye. Hopefully you're having a good day. I'm just kind of waking up here, so hopefully I'm not completely an incoherent mess. So things we want to have happen. So for dynamic ripples, what do we actually want? Like, we're going to want to be able to drop something in the water and create these ripples. And I guess these things have to have various sizes. So like if we drop a giant rock in there versus we drop something that's not a giant rock. Like, I guess we could also say what we don't want to happen. So we want different sizes for initial waves. We'd like to have waves combine magnitudes. Waves should have, I'll just call them waves, who cares? Had a good day, hope you're having a good one as well. Yeah, I am. We'll see. If I can come up with a good way to actually get this thing working, then, well, my day will be pretty solid. So waves should combine magnitude. Waves should... I'd like to have them interact with shore. And I'm not really sure what I want waves to do when they hit the shore. I mean, it'd be really cool, like, if the actual waves reflect outward. We want waves to lose magnitude over time and eventually disappear. I know, I'm working normal daytime. It happens, you know, like maybe once a week. I really am like on like a 30-hour schedule. Everyone else operates on a 24-hour day, but I just don't. I'm that one guard in a stealth game that doesn't keep regular hours. Which means I'll probably get killed first if there's somebody sneaking around. Alright, so waves, they lose their magnitude over time. We'll have them eventually disappear. It'd be nice if we didn't have to model the waves as waves. But it's probably an optimization to actually... because if we probably have to use them as waves, like kind of our algorithm would be like, how do we actually update the texture? It'd be like clear the... Because we want to write to our data array, which then writes to our texture. Let me just make sure everything is set up in the creator component. Yeah, we're ignoring the optimization we could probably have. Not that it really works very well. So I guess a naive way to write to this data array would be like clear the array to white. Then it'd be like write every wave to that array, and then you know like add magnitudes together, and then write to texture. So that's kind of our completely naive way of writing our data. So if we're doing it like that, then like we do need to model a wave as an object that we have some initial values, and then we write the current values based on dt. So, I mean, we're kind of just, the wave is a collection of particles that follow some sort of mathematical function, perhaps? We can't follow just a simple mathematical function, because if we do that, we're not going to be able to interact with the shore. I mean, could we do this just like we did with the particles for water with some simple rules that would actually work? So I mean, if the waves, I think kind of what we want is we want an initial geometry to spawn down the disturbance in the water, which is probably a circle or an oval or a box. Let's just draw some basic water with a little bit of shore and see what we would probably do. Like, I guess if everything was just an oval of some sort, we could maybe spawn down an oval. like we'd want a disturbance in there. Do we want to fill these things? Do you plan to add collision waves, or will they just fade away with meshes they're supposed to collide with? Well, the idea hopefully would be that we already have our texture, which has all of our shore information on it. So we don't actually have to have like meshes with collision. We could just look up, in a pixel to see if like we are colliding with something. So, yeah, the idea was maybe waves should interact with the shore by reflecting outwards. I mean, that's something I'd like to see if we could do, and then figure that out. And I'm trying to figure out kind of the right way to model it. So, like if we modeled our thing using a mathematical function, so you just take like, well, this wave is 2 seconds old, so therefore we should draw a circle of, this size onto the texture. And, what that would do would mean that as this thing goes over time, it would just look like this, and these waves would disappear as they went into the rocks. But it would be nicer if, like, we actually had the wave collide with the rocks and then reflect back outwards and interfere with itself and all that stuff. So I guess that's another thing we want. We need positive and negative magnitudes for waves. Yeah, the simplest thing would be just like what we did right there, where we're just drawing boxes onto this thing. Instead of boxes, we just draw circles and have like some sort of thickness on the circle, and there you go, non-interactable waves that, we could do interference and stuff like that with it. But it wouldn't reflect on the shore. And I'd really like to have something that would reflect on the shore. So the only idea I can think of is that we actually simulate this as a collection of particles that we spawn from this like center geometry here. So instead of a circle here, we actually have like a whole bunch of little particles. And we'd have to have enough particles that it actually spawn correctly. So what we do is stamp down the initial geometry on this thing. And we'd have to spawn in like kind of our wave would be a collection of positive and negative particles. I don't know, which specific part were you saying? The magnitudes for waves in the water plane blueprints? From the video that I shared yesterday? Well, is it in the blueprint or is it actually in the material that they're using? Because if it's just like they're using, just waves with noise and stuff like that. I mean, they've got like a water material. They're setting a whole bunch of scales, water depth, scale stuff. I don't see any sort of like actual simulation of waves other than using like noise textures in order to do that. Which I mean would be something else I could do, right? Like I could just use a noise texture or something and write that to this location. Or use a noise texture in some form to at least create the particles. The other thing I could do, if this thing is like a circle in geometry or something, I could spawn a new wave at like a location. Like I don't actually have to... Well, that's an interesting idea. Instead of having... So like if this wave interacted with the shore or something, I could just spawn a new wave at the shore and just let the other wave go into the shore. So I could model all these with math basically and fill them in. But the magnitudes of these, like, you know, child waves would be I think expensive, because like every single, I'd have to have like, you know, for every pixel collision it would have to spawn a new wave, so we'd end up with like, you know, every single area here would potentially spawn a new wave system, which would then collide with the shore again, and like we don't have any information as to which shore is which, so it would just recursively spawn bajillions of waves. And you could always have like some sort of shore counter thing where it wouldn't spawn more. I think it's probably best to model with particles that follow certain rules. So for me to actually have a reflection, like say, if we model this with particles that move, yeah, well, we can't use tessellation because as soon as you start using tessellation, you're throwing away a whole bunch of people who don't have graphics cards to support that. You're only supposed to use tessellation for extra stuff, and I'd rather not do that. Like we're not in the material yet. We're outside of the material, so we don't have access to any of that. So I mean, yeah, we're basically wanting to make that displacement map inside of our blueprint. And we'll get to, you know, the actual creating of the waves in the material once we actually have that information. From what I saw, they were what I didn't look too closely, but it looked like they had noise textures in order to create displacement maps and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're speaking a different language at this point in terms of when you say waves and I say waves, we're thinking about different things, because as far as I saw, for everything that they have, like you have a bunch of panning textures that are not dynamic textures. You know, these are statically generated noise textures, which are just moving around, so it's not like they're dynamically making, you know, new waves. They're just showing them in different areas and then moving around, you know, with like wind speed or whatever. So it's You can do some things with that, but I'd rather have, like we drop a rock into the water and then all of a sudden, we have waves that come out of it. So I don't think it's the same at all. The effects inside of the material you're talking about, like using tessellation and using how to apply the displacement map to the pixels to get them to look good, yeah, that's totally relevant. But we're not there yet. We need the information that we pass into the material. Yeah, Mimofid, that's totally what we will be doing in the material. So your information is not inaccurate. It's just we're in step 1, and that's like step 3. I'm just trying to figure out how to make that displacement map based on the dynamic interactions with the game. And the only solution I'm really coming up with is like a number of particles that actually simulate the wave that need to be. And the problem with that is we need a lot of particles to simulate it, because we need, like, the actual thing is, a big pixel grid. So if we're going to model a circle on this grid, like we've got a wave here that starts off, tick 2 is going to need to like go like that. And then the next tick is going to have to be like this. I know this is just the best diagram of all time. But basically we'd have this like pixel grid that we need to have, we'd be working in world space and then converting to pixel space. And we'd basically have like an emitter geometry, so that would be like a circle in the middle that is writing particles first, like you could just stamp them down, and then those particles have to follow certain rules. Well, let me see if there's actually a simple rule that I could use. God, what the hell is that game? I mean, was that... I'm trying to remember. Like, you can see wave effects in different pixel-based games. Like, I think there's one in Minecraft where somebody set up like a fire that would burn in a circle around some geometry, because like the rules for the fire allowed it to move in certain directions, and it actually created standing waves. So it may be that we can just spawn particles that follow very simple rules that then actually create a wave effect themselves. Kind of like if we spawn a particle and it exists on a specific spot, and around it spawns other particles every frame or something. Kind of like how, if you're taking a programming class, is kind of the quote-unquote game of life. If there's like too much stuff next to something, it dies. If there's nothing next to it, it dies. If there's something next to it, but it's not like crowded, then it creates a new thing. And these systems create waves and stuff like that, where you'll see like things move around all cool like. So we could maybe use simple rules for our particles and create our wave system out of that. So the idea. So why don't we see if there are any rules that these particles could follow. So let's just say particle doesn't move. If there's no motion, let's just ignore all the flow field crap to begin with, and we'll add that in later. So the particle doesn't move. Each tick the particle moves. The particle doesn't move. Then each tick the particle moves. No. Each tick the particle switches magnitudes, switches charges, you know, like it goes positive to negative. And each tick the particle spawns particles next to it. And each tick the particle loses power. When a particle's magnitude goes to 0, it dies. And let's see, these particles have the same magnitude as the source. Alright, let's see, a particle in a wall dies or maybe something like 2 particles of the same source cannot be in the same place. So what would this do? For the entire duration of a wave, this thing would die. This wouldn't work because waves would like just be like a thing that comes out that just is noisy and stupid. When it hits a wall, it's just going to make more noise and stupidity, and it's not going to really look like a wave, because a wave should have kind of an edge that comes out. It should, if we're going to model a wave like this wave, the wave looks like it's just 3 sets of particles. Like this is a wave. If red is the top of the wave, and then we have the bottom of the wave, like it's just 2 or 3 sets of particles, right? Because I guess it's just 2 sets of particles, you know, or one set which draws itself to 2 sides, where we have a positive and a negative, and to make, you know, a standing wave, we would just keep emitting these things. So if we spawned a whole bunch of particles, and particles move outwards from their source, and for every particle it will write around itself a positive and negative, or it will write, it has a direction and it will write in front of itself and behind itself. Alright, so why don't we just scrap these rules. So particles move. Each tick a particle writes its crest in front of it and each tick a particle rights, crest in front, trough in back, each tick the particle loses magnitude. Particles move based on an initial direction. Yeah, particles have to have a direction to actually move in an initial direction, so the first set of rules wouldn't work at all. But with this one, yeah, you know, like a particle that encounters a wall, well, how do we actually figure out the direction to go? Because we don't have a normal to the surface of the wall. We just know that we would be encountering one. So we could reflect straight back, but we can't reflect outwards. We could attempt to approximate the normal to the wall. And we probably could do that, but it'd be a little bit more expensive. You know, like we'd have to look up around where our particle is, figure out where the wall is, and then like take the slope of that wall. We could probably do it with some discovery algorithm. You know, just like look in a box and figure it out, and it should be close enough. Like, you know, do like a box test, and then take, you know, the top left and top right written pixels, and then make a slope from there, and just assume it's good enough. I mean, it would have some artifacts, but they'd be unnoticeable. Though for the most part, a lot of the geometry for the walls of this are not going to be like circular or anything. They're going to be kind of blocky and stupid, so we'll see. So how many particles would I have to write, and how do the particles write to the grid field? Because if we spawn a whole hell of a lot of particles and they come off, they're naturally going to lose. If we just write additively, we're going to have to write enough particles that we write them all at once at the beginning, and they're going to have the biggest magnitude, and as they come out, they're actually going to, just by their motion, we're going to lose power, you know, magnitude of the wave based on the distance squared, which means this thing's going to fall off really damn quick, even though we I mean, that's how waves work. Like, that's just how shit works in reality. The problem is, what works in reality is not necessarily going to work in the game, because we'd probably see the wave fall off way too damn fast. I mean, we could actually just look at it and see if we can throw enough particles at it. Why don't we put some actual numbers on this? So, a set number of particles get spawned for our wave. So if it's a mathematical point, our texture is 512 by 512. If we wanted a wave, how many particles would we spawn to make sure to cover the entire surface of the wave? We know the pixels to cover the surface of a circle is just going to be, you know, 2 pi or whatever, 2 pi r. So if our circle is 10 pixels in radius, you know, we're going to need 60 particles to create the actual wave itself at 10 pixels in distance. Why don't we have a wave that goes the entire distance of the thing, so 10 pixels, so like 256 pixels multiplied by 6. What we're gonna get, we're gonna get 1536 particles minimum to cover the entire circle on there. How many particles can we get away with? We'd have to like set a budget of how many particles this thing can actually use, or how many waves, or something like that. I mean, it's not the worst thing ever. Like, we could actually get away with, like, we might be able to get away with that many particles. Updating something 1500 times really isn't all that slow, as long as what we're doing is not accessing a whole bunch of random crap. It's possible we could do it. Alright, let's say we've got, maybe a max of 200 particles. So we're just like 200 divided by 6. So we could have about a 33 pixel wide wave. Yeah, that would definitely be there. We'd basically do a calculation of how the lifetime and everything like that this thing is, and then spawn that number of particles or whatever. And that's going to be pretty cheap, because we only have to do that calculation once, spawn down all the particles, and then like basically the particles would write, we could do something with the particles to make sure they only wrote once to the same thing. Like if we update every wave and it's like the wave counter is 1 and the last thing that wrote was 1, then we just set maximum or some bullshit. There are ways we can kind of skip over this, like assume that if we've already written a 1 to this thing, then we don't have to write anymore, because it can't go any lower or whatever. Alright, so a 33 pixel wide wave would be the maximum for 200 particles. How big is 33 pixels in radius? In world space, that's going to be, it's a 512 texture that covers cave. So it's like 60 divided by 512. So we're 10% of the way, so a wave that would be this big on screen would take 200 particles to cover everything, and then we would see fragmentation. Theoretically, the fragmentation could be, at those points we would have less value anyway, so the fragmentation would probably just blur out to nothingness, so it would look fine, and we could also minimize some of that stuff. Well, it could work. I don't see why it wouldn't work. It's an expensive algorithm. but it's directly proportional to the number of waves, and we can always kill waves or something like that if it's a real problem. We can have less particles and reduce the quality. And a lot of these are going to be small anyway, so we probably won't have the ridiculous 1500 particle waves. Well, I think it could work. So how do we write to the texture? So for each wave, for each particle, write to current location, our crest, write to previous location, our trough, move particle by its speed. So we need like a rule, like to write to our location, we must be the first particle to actually write. So increment wave number counter, then set. Well, I'm a fan. We'll see. I usually like to overestimate how bad the algorithm is going to be and all that, and then pull it back, just so I, kind of a pessimistic approach. That way we don't blow it all out. Alright, so basically we'll be able to move these particles as part of the update tick loop for when we actually write to the texture, so we don't have to iterate twice and all that garbage. We can store previous location. So I want to store our pixel and world space. Yeah, move particle by its speed and compute the texture space coordinate and save. So this would write, we spawned them all here. The first tick, they would write to their current location. The previous location would be nothing, so we wouldn't write to it. We then tick, they would move out. We would write to our current location. We'd only write once, so we'd still have the same magnitude all around in our circle or square. Are we going to have any sort of blurring on this thing to blur out edges? Also, we only have 1 pixel wide particles. Should we have a width for a particle? Should we have a blur pass for this texture as a whole? Because just 1 pixel wide stuff is not very good. We want, like for a wave you need the crest, the trough, and the period of the wave. So if we're going to model a particle, we actually need to model the front of the wave and the back of the wave, and we need to write between it. Using, theoretically we would use like a sine function for the actual wave from the distance there. So what we'd want to do is write from our current location to the back of the wave every pixel along that path with a computed value. And we would want to go back a set distance, and then we'd have like a fall off? Shit. Anyway, these rules work for 1 pixel wide waves, but that's trash. So we need a different set of rules. Alright, so why don't we change the rules? So particles move based on initial direction. Alright. So I'm trying to think, basically, as these particles move through this field of values, we could set stuff. So as a particle moves through, it's got like... So if we wrote... God, alright, so basically, like, if we had these particles and they wrote all these values down into, data, and then we have, like, the data we're actually looking at, we could be like, well, I'm supposed to look like this, and then, so our actual drawn data, the texture would actually be like, we take this data, and then we take, like, this historical data, and we're like, oh, well, I'm supposed to be at 1, but right now I'm at -1, so I'm going to move towards that value. So as these particles write to this data, this other texture would try to look like it, and then we'd see history. So as this particle moves through, this thing is going to have like some momentum for these. It would be like every single pixel is a particle itself with a momentum, and as these particles come through, the map will write the value it should be. This one's like, oh, well, I'm at -1, I'm supposed to be at 1, so I'm going to head very quickly up to 1. And this thing would never look like this, but it would look like it's close, and it would be smooth. It'd be like, try to go towards 0, and all these other rules. It'd basically be, we have particles that are writing to something, and then we have like 1 pixel per, 1 particle per pixel. But we'd have to update that, so like a 512 by 512 texture is going to have a ridiculous number of particles in it. So for us to actually do that, we'd have to do like that many update ticks. And I think that's just untenable. We can't do that. We can't do a blur on these things. We actually have to model these particles themselves. So if we have a wave here, this is my ASCII wave. We need to model the entire wave, so we need to... This would be our pixel right here. It's just really funny. Like, alright, so this is our pixel in the middle. So our pixel needs to look forward by... What's the definition of the period? Is it like the period is twice the length of the wave or whatever the fuck? So we basically have like the particle has a width, and we need to write to the texture. Basically, we need to write this entire continuum. So compute start of wave To actually write our texture, we need to write the line along which this would be. So we'd have to have a line drawing algorithm for this. Now, most people might, well, programmers might assume line drawing algorithms are super simple, but actually they can be kind of expensive at times. So, pixel perfect line algorithms can be not as simple as you might think, because as you like draw a line between two places in pixel space, you might, you know, if it's like a straight line, like that's not a problem. But what if like the line's supposed to look like this, or what if, you know, there's like, if the slope of the line is a certain thing, you might end up with weird gaps, like, you know, you'd never have a line that has like 3 on it, you'd like skip a step. So I could have like a crappy line drawing algorithm that does this. That's okay, guys. I'm just gonna be modeling light inside of this, where it's both a particle and a wave. This is where we discovered that the universe is just a gigantic hack, and God is just a really shitty programmer on Twitch, going like, "Oh fuck, all right, so like I need to like, Jesus Christ, no, this is bad. The humans have invented nuclear weapons, and I need to figure out what's gonna go down here." So we basically have this particle which is going to create a wave in our system. And if we have enough particles, it'll look correct based on our writing rules. Alright, so we can do a real naive line drawing algorithm. Basically just take up the slope is like greater than 1 or less than 1, and then basically flip how we draw pixels. Like basically if the slope is how you can draw some lines, so like you basically like check if slope was greater than 1, and if the slope is greater than 1, then you iterate along the y-axis, and if the slope is, and for your slope you're like you calculate your slope, you know, y equals mx plus b, and you just like invert that equation, so when you plug in, you know, like your x or your y, you figure out where you are. Watching the ultimate version of SimCity is like, you know what, fuck it, we're gonna combine rhinos and butterflies. So if we have a line drawing algorithm here, I need to know the number of writes. So the number of writes per wave is going to be the... Well, the question would be, should the magnitude of the wave also be related to the period of the wave? I guess it's going to be the size of wave multiplied by the number of particles And can we do anything? So we make this actual wave. If I was going to write a function here on our water, it would be like water dot create wave, and I'd pass in a position, I'd pass in a radius, and I'd pass in like a time of like until the system completely disappears. I guess it'd be position, radius, and magnitude. And what we would do is we'd spawn particles that this distance right here needs to span the entire thing. So the radius is going to be this value. So the particles would actually spawn like outwards from this thing in a circle. So we'd have like a T-array of particle, and particle has like a position, it's got a direction, all that sort of crap. It's gonna have like wave ID. I could just have like a big block of particles that I've statically allocated, so we just iterate through the damn thing and we never allocate any memory for it. And all that if we need to be super efficient for this bullshit. But it's a lot of signs. So the question is, can we approximate our sine function? So like, I just need like a shitty and fast sine function alternative. We could just take a linear distance or something like that, right? Like, what if our waves are not smooth but actually look like this retarded bullshit right here, where we just linearly interpolate? So it's like, this is this thing, and we just like, we could just do a linear wave as opposed to a sine wave, and it would look close enough. So why don't we just write that down? Potential optimizations. Linear wave instead of sine curve. So this would support waves of any radius. The radius of the wave is going to be limited to how big it is, so a bigger splash would create a larger wave. The first step is to write the actual initial circle. So if this was a thing, the middle of it would be empty. Is that okay? Do we care about having the middle of something be empty? I don't think we give two shits about it, to be honest. Alright, so what about blurring this so things don't look all jagged and crappy? Well, theoretically, if we have enough of these things, this